What creeps you out? Think about it. Is it looks, greasy hair, long fingernails, dirty clothes? Or is it behavior? If someone is staring at you, maybe talking to themselves? And what about occupation? One study found that people rated the creepiest occupations to be a taxidermist or a clown, with the least creepy being a meteorologist. Creepiness is defined as essentially being unsure whether an individual poses a threat. And this is usually when their looks and their behavior deviate from the norm. This makes them unpredictable in our eyes, and so we basically try to determine whether or not they're dangerous. I think this is a plausible explanation. I mean, if someone was standing in front of me waving a gun at my face, demanding my money, I wouldn't exactly call them creepy. I think I'd be sure of their intentions, to say the least. The thing about being creeped out is that at times it can serve as a survival instinct and protect us. Other times, however, it might be influenced by biases and stereotypes that we see in the media. So media can therefore subconsciously influence who we find creepy. And a really prominent way that this applies is when dealing with mental illness. During this talk, I'm going to tell you why that is, and then I'm going to give you some information to help you reevaluate how you let your perception of creepiness influence yourself and others. So, people diagnosed with mental illness can sometimes behave differently than those who are not, fitting into this so-called concept of abnormality. And as mentioned earlier, when faced with something abnormal, we tend to go in defense mode. Sometimes we can even go in offense mode. Because their behavior is unfamiliar to us, we find them creepy, because we don't know whether or not to be scared. And when we're faced with trying to understand something unpredictable or unfamiliar to us, a big part of that is through observation. For those of us that don't deal with mental illness in our daily lives, we might look to media or entertainment to enlighten us. And I'm sure you can guess how that turns out. Let me tell you about a study conducted to investigate the effects that unrealistic media representations of mental illness had on people's perception of mental illness. So the results that they found basically showed that those living more in the virtual world, being televisions, phones, laptops, screens basically, were more likely to have distorted conceptions of what mental illness really is. Now, if we're talking about relatively rare disorders such as dissociative identity disorder, also known as multiple personality disorder, a lot of people, especially those living in the virtual world, might picture this guy. Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm sure you'd all love to go over to his house and see all of his friendly alternative identities, also known as alters, as these cheerleaders are clearly doing. But I'll have to burst your bubble and tell you that this is not what DID really looks like. Instead, this is Roswell. Him and his alter Fox are sociology students at Ithaca College. They have pretty balanced interactions, a stable relationship with their psychiatrist. One is a bit more introverted, with the other one being a bit more extroverted and confident. They seem like pretty cool guys. That's what DID really looks like. And I know that what is represented from what is actually real, the difference might be unrealistically large. But for those that rely on the media, that might be the extent to their misconception. Let's bring up another example. I think that this is an accurate depiction of how schizophrenia is represented through the media. When you think of schizophrenia, how do you feel? Do you feel positive emotions, negative emotions? If negative emotions, do you feel fear? Do you feel on edge? Or maybe you just feel indifferent? If the answer is uncomfortable and/or afraid, you're not alone. There was a study conducted that wanted to see how people's prejudices influenced how close they sat next to a person suffering from schizophrenia. How they did this was they brought participants into a waiting room full of a bunch of empty seats. One of the seats, however, had a couple of accessories on it, such as a handbag or a scarf. They told the participants that there was a lady occupying that seat with schizophrenia, and she was gone momentarily, but she would be back. As expected, those with the most prejudice sat further away from the seat. In all honesty, I don't find this study that reliable. I don't know about you, but personally, if I'm faced in a room with a bunch of empty seats, I'm not going to be sitting close to the one that's occupied, no matter who is occupying it. However, these principles are also shown in another study, in which participants stated that they would feel uncomfortable being in the same room as someone with schizophrenia or major depressive disorder. So now that I've brought some insight into how a lot of people see others with mental illness, I'm going to try and put things into perspective for you. Let me ask you a question. I have two individuals on either side of me. One of them diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. The other one, a severe alcoholic. Which one is more dangerous? The stigma surrounding mental illness would propose that the person with DID is more dangerous. But that's wrong. In reality, it's the alcoholic that poses more of a threat than the person diagnosed with DID. I looked at 3 different studies that tested the validity of the mental illness stigma, and I found similar conclusions from each one. First of all, those who are hospitalized in psychiatric institutions are perceived as less dangerous, especially by those who have actual knowledge of psychiatric services. This just goes to show that awareness of what mental illness is really like considerably helps the accuracy of your perception. In fact, those who are perceived as more dangerous were alcohol dependent, possess dangerous behavior, and generally are male. Sorry, guys. And the second and most important thing is that research has shown that the common factor between most convicted felons, regardless of whether they suffer from mental illness, is substance abuse. People with mental illness are dangerous. This is the stigma that goes through our minds whenever we're faced with something creepy, something abnormal. But that's wrong. The truth is that it's not the mental illness that makes the person dangerous, but their abuse of drugs and alcohol. Why is this so important? Well, when a stigma like this is so integrated into our society, it results in discrimination and dehumanization of those suffering from mental illness. In fact, we usually victimize alcoholics while calling those with illnesses such as DID freaks. And this can lead to what is known as a secondary disease, being the increased anxiety, stress, functional issues, and overall lower quality of life that results from being a part of a stigma like this. And if we think about it, these secondary diseases might actually lead to substance abuse. It's almost like a vicious cycle, and we can't avoid it because our reactions are part of the problem. So when we live our lives, how can we be more conscious about our behavior towards others? Well, this is where differentiating paranoia from intuition comes in. If we build this skill, this ability to understand our reactions, whether they are protective feelings or whether they're biased responses, this can help us stop being a part of secondary diseases and start being a part of a just society. Now, it's not a skill built overnight, and we always have to be very, very careful when trying to figure out the difference. But I have included a brief description of each to help speed along the process. Paranoia is usually filled with feelings of fear and irrational thinking, whereas intuition occurs more neutrally and naturally, as though your body is on autopilot and it feels the need to step back. Now, this isn't always the case, but from my research, I found that this was the most common difference between the two. In addition to this, from the results we saw earlier of people with actual psychiatric knowledge having more realistic perceptions and conceptions of people suffering from mental illness, this just goes to show that we need to spread psychiatric awareness, because knowledge is power. And the more we know, the less likely we are to judge someone who's different from us. The less likely we are to be creeped out by the wrong people. A dude could be a taxidermist by day and a clown by night, but he could be a saint. And the meteorologist next door could be the real person that we should be afraid of. So stay conscious of your decisions, don't fall into stigma, and sit next to the schizophrenic. Thank you.